Face the clerk and raise your right hand.
You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the trial and obtained before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I swear.
State and spell your name for the record.
My name is Stephen Schwab, S-T-E-V-E-N-S-C-H-W-A-B.
You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Schwab.
Morning.
Directing your attention, sir, to the date of June the 12th, 1994,
Yeah.
Sunday. As of that date, sir, can you tell us where you lived?
I live on Montana Avenue. Do I need to give the exact address?
No, sir,
Thank
you
you.
don't. Did you live, was that on Montana near to Bundy?
Yes, that's on Montana between Bundy and San Vicente.
How far from the intersection of Bundy and San Vicente did you live at that date?
It's about half a block.
Do you own any pets, sir?
Yes, I have two pets. I own a dog and a cat.
Do you ever walk the dog in that neighborhood?
Yes, I walk the dog in that neighborhood in the morning and at night.
With regard to at night, is that a habit that you have, sir, of doing that every night?
Yes, I walk the dog every night after watching television.
Is there a particular time that you always walk the dog at night?
It varies from day to day because of the different shows that are on. Generally, during the week, I walk it at a different hour than on the weekends.
During the week, what time do you usually walk your dog at night?
I usually leave the house at 11:30. That's on during the week. I generally watch the Dick Van Dyke Show and then walk my dog, and that's during the week. That's on between 11 and 11:30.
And on Sunday nights?
Well, the Dick Van Dyke Show is also on, but it's on an hour earlier. So I watch the Dick Van Dyke Show on Sunday night. I watch it between 10 and 10:30, and then I go to walk my dog.
Now, June the 12th was a Sunday, sir?
Yes, it was.
Did you watch the Dick Van Dyke Show that night?
Yes, I did.
And that was at what time that you watched that show?
I watched the show between 10 and 10:30.
Did you watch the entire show, sir?
Yes, I did.
And what time did that show end?
That ends just prior to 10:30.
Did you walk the dog that night after you watched the show?
Yes, as soon as the show was over, I got my dog, put her leash on, and took her for a walk.
So on the night of June the 12th, that Sunday night, about what time did you leave your apartment to walk your dog?
Shortly after 10:30, between 10:30 and 10:35, much closer to 10:30.
Can you tell us what route you took when you walked her?
Yes, I walked down Montana, and I continued along Montana. I crossed the street at the intersection of Montana and Bundy, and continued along Montana until I got to a street called Gretna Green. At Gretna Green, I made a left and walked up one block, made a right on a street called Gorham. I then walked down one block, made a left on Amherst, walked up one block to Amherst and Dorothy, made a left at Amherst and Dorothy, and continued along Dorothy until I came to Bundy.
Now, if you can tell us, you walked along Montana past Bundy and you
Yes.
went left on Gretna Green?
Yes.
How long did it take you to get to Gretna Green?
Well, I looked at my watch when I turned to go down Gretna Green, and that was 10:37. I remember that my dog had taken care of its business, and I was deciding whether to return home or to continue walking. And it was a nice night, so I decided to continue walking.
So what time was it about when you got to Gretna Green?
10:37.
10:37, you know that exactly?
Well, between 10:35 and 10:40. Obviously, it's not exact because I don't have a digital watch, but it was between 10:35 and 10:40.
Were you wearing a watch at all?
Yes, I was wearing a watch.
A regular watch, not the digital kind?
Not the digital. In fact, I'm wearing it now. It's a regular watch.
Can you show us what kind of watch that is?
Sure. It's a regular watch. It doesn't have numbers on the face. It's not a digital watch.
For the record, the witness is indicating a watch that has dots where the hours would be.
All right.
An analog watch. So at what streets did you decide to turn around and go back home?
Well, that was when I came to Amherst and Dorothy. At Amherst and Dorothy, I made a left, which would take me back home. I use this route. This takes me generally half an hour to do because I get home, and then another show begins at 11 o'clock or 11:30, so that's the route I use.
So you turned around at Amherst and Dorothy and decided to go back home.
Correct.
What happened next?
Well, I was walking down Dorothy, and as I approached the corner of Dorothy and Bundy, I saw that there was a dog at the corner. It was a large Akita, very white, and as I approached further, I saw that it wasn't with anyone. There was no one walking the dog. The dog was just there. And the dogs, it was unusual for a dog to just be wandering the neighborhood by itself, and the dog seemed agitated. It was barking at the house on the corner.
On the corner of what?
On the corner of Dorothy and Bundy. There's a house in the corner that has a driveway, a path to the door that comes right to the corner, and it was looking down that path and barking. It was very unusual for a dog to be barking at a house that way, but that's what it was doing.
Can you
And
describe the way the dog looked?
yes, it was a white Akita, beautiful dog. It had a collar on, and what looked like a very expensive embroidered collar, red and blue. And it smelled my dog, and my dog smelled it. And as I looked I checked the collar to see if there was an address or a tag on there, but there wasn't, so I didn't know where the dog was from. And as I examined the dog further, I noticed that there was blood on the paws.
Blood on all four paws?
There seemed to be blood on all of the paws in different amounts. There was more on some than on others, but there was blood on the paws. I noticed some blood on one of the back paws. That was the one I noticed first.
Now, what time was it when you first saw that dog?
Well, I didn't look at my watch at the moment that this occurred, but based on the path and how long it generally takes me, I would say that was approximately 10:55.
And that was at the corner of Dorothy and Bundy?
Yes, it was.
Did the dog wear a leash?
No, there was no leash. It was just the collar.
The blood that you saw on the dog's paws, did it appear to be wet, fresh, or dry?
I didn't touch the blood, so I don't really know. The dog was also dirty, and there seemed to be mud on the dog. But I didn't get any blood on my hands or anything like that, so I don't know whether it was wet or dry.
After your dogs, those two dogs, met each other,
Yeah.
what happened next?
Well, my dog doesn't like other dogs very much. They barked at each other for a little bit, and then I noticed by that time that no one had come. That it wasn't like a block or two behind, in front of its owner or anything. So I crossed the street at that point. I crossed the street from one side of Bundy to the other, and the dog stayed with us. The dog followed us, and so knowing that this was a lost dog, I allowed it to stay with us, and I made a left at that point on Bundy, heading back towards my house.
During the time that the dog walked with you,
Mhm.
did it continue to bark?
Yes, it was very strange. It would bark at each house as we passed. It would bark when we got to the entrance to the house, or the path leading to the door of the houses, it would bark at the houses. I had never seen anything like that before, but it would stop at each house and bark.
So as you walked down the sidewalk, you had
Mhm.
your dog, the other one was following you, and
Yes.
every time you got to a place where a path leading up to a residence met the sidewalk, the dog would stop, look at the house, and bark?
Yes, absolutely. But the dog also didn't want to get very far from myself and my dog. It stayed very, very close to us.
Where did you go?
Well, I continued to walk down Bundy, and at that point, a police car came going in the other direction. And so I flagged the police car down to tell him that I had found this dog. And I did. I told the officer that I had found this dog that's obviously lost, and that maybe he could, call someone, find out if anyone had reported a missing dog. And he said he would take care of it, and so I continued on, but the dog continued to follow me. And it followed me down Bundy past Gorham again, and then all the way to Montana. So I turned the corner on Montana, I made a right on Montana heading home, and the cop pulled into a driveway on Montana, and we spoke again because obviously the dog wasn't going to leave my side. So at that point, I gave him my address and phone number and said that I would take the dog home and that he would call the animal control people and that they would contact me with regard to the dog. So I left the police officer at that time, continued home, and the dog followed me into the courtyard of my building, which has a pool, and up the stairs. I live on the second floor, up the stairs to my apartment. I mean, it stayed right with me.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
At that point, I went into the house, leaving the dog outside because my wife was inside, and I also have a cat, and I didn't want to freak either of them out. So I closed the door and told my wife that this big Akita had followed me home.
On the entire walk home, did the dog continue to bark?
It barked periodically, absolutely. I remember also it barked at the corner of Gorham and Bundy. It barked again. It went through a phase in which it barked, and then as I continued to walk up Bundy, it stopped and caught up with us again.
Do you recall what time you got home?
Yeah, I got home at 11:05. I remember because Mary Tyler Moore was on at that point. It was the beginning of the show. I watch a lot of TV.
So when you got home, what did you do?
I told my wife that this big Akita had followed me home. We had helped stray dogs get home in the past because being dog owners ourselves, we're very sympathetic to any time when a dog is separated from its owner. So I told her that, and I also told her about the police officer and the animal control people. I showed her the dog. I opened the door, and she saw the dog. But again, we didn't let it into the house because we didn't want to freak out our cat by bringing this big dog in. And I got a spare leash from the closet. I have a couple of extras for my own dog, and I put the spare leash on the collar of the dog and walked back out to the front of the building to see if the animal control people had arrived yet.
So did you go downstairs or?
Yes, I went back downstairs and back out to the front of the building. And
were you then standing outside with the dog?
Yeah, I was
on the leash you put on it in front of the building?
I sat outside in front of the building with the leash, with the dog on the leash, and sat at the front steps and waited to see if somebody would arrive from animal control.
Did anyone arrive from animal control?
No one arrived from animal control.
So what did you do?
My wife came outside, and we decided to try to walk the dog back to where I had found it to see if maybe the owner was there or if that was close to where the dog had come from. And I tried to walk the dog up Montana towards Bundy, but the dog didn't want to go. So when the dog pulled back in the other direction, I noticed at that point that the dog was very dehydrated. It was panting. So I decided to bring the dog back to our courtyard and give it some water because it obviously needed water.
So when you tried to walk it back towards the location of Bundy, it pulled back away from
It pulled back away from the corner of Bundy and Montana. It pulled back on Montana back towards where I live.
So at that point you took it back and gave it water?
Yes, I brought the dog back to the courtyard. I left my wife with the dog and went upstairs and got my own dog's bowl, filled it with water, brought it back downstairs, and gave the dog water. It drank quite a bit of water, and that seemed to settle it down quite a bit.
Now you said the dog seemed to be dehydrated.
Yeah.
What about the dog made you think that?
It was panting. It was panting continuously.
Was it hot that night?
It wasn't especially hot that night. It was a nice night.
Would you say it was a cool night?
Generally speaking, I'd say it was a cool night.
But the dog was panting?
The dog was panting, and my wife was there. Why won't it go? Why won't it go where you're taking it? And I said, I don't know, but I can see that the dog is dehydrated. I think the best thing to do at this point would be to give it some water, because again, I didn't know at that point how long the dog had been lost. It could have been weeks for all I know that the dog was wandering and just happened to arrive in this neighborhood. So I decided to bring it back to my apartment and give it some water.
When you first saw the dog and when you were walking with the dog on the street, was it well lit where you saw the dog?
No, it was not well lit. It's a very dark corner.
When you brought the dog back home, and you were downstairs with the dog, was there more light?
Yeah, there was more light.
Were you able to observe the dog then more closely, to look at its body, its legs?
I saw the dog more closely at that point.
And what did you notice, if anything, more about the dog?
Well, I noticed again that it was dirty and that there was blood on the paws.
Did you notice
At that point, I would say that the blood was dried.
Did you notice whether there was any blood on the legs of the dog?
There was the underside of the dog was dirty, and again, I noticed the blood on the paws, but I didn't think that much about it. My dog has come home with a bloody paw sometimes from stepping on glass or a fight with another dog, so I didn't think that much about that, especially being that it was a lost dog. I had no idea what it had been through at that point.
So the blood on the paws didn't strike you as something to worry about because you thought it might have stepped on glass?
Yeah, except that I noticed that the dog wasn't hurt in any way. Despite that, there was no injury that I could see to the dog. The dog wasn't cut on the paws, but I didn't think much more about it, again, because it could have happened much earlier.
So you didn't see any obvious cuts on the dog to cause that blood?
There were no cuts on the dog at that point. It itself was not bleeding at that point in any way.
And did you see any blood anywhere other than the paws on the dog?
Well, again, the dog seemed dirty, especially the underside of the dog, the chest of the dog. I don't know myself whether that was blood or mud or dirt, but it was the underside of the dog was dirty.
And the legs?
And the legs. Again, I noticed the blood, and I don't remember noticing any mud, particularly on the legs. I noticed the blood.
Blood on the legs?
Yeah.
Did you ever hear from animal control?
Well, after I'd given the dog the water, I went upstairs and saw that the light on my telephone answering machine was blinking. Actually, that was when I went up to get the water for the dog. I noticed that the light on my answering machine was blinking, but I didn't stop to listen to the message at that point. And that was that would have been about between 11:25 and 11:30. Again, my TV was still on, and it was the end of the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And I noticed that the light was blinking. I came down with the water, gave the water to the dog, and told my wife about our answering machine was blinking, that we had a message. So she went upstairs and listened to the message. And the message said that the animal control people couldn't come by that night. If we wanted to bring the dog by ourselves, they would take it, but that they were closing at 12 o'clock, and so if we didn't do this quickly, they were going to close for the night.
Okay, I'm learning that. What did you do?
Well, my wife and I discussed what to do. This upset my wife because it seemed very insensitive that they were just going to close up for the night. Also, the fact that we bring it there at 12 o'clock and then the person who's there goes home, and there's no one with the dogs all night. So I went back upstairs to call the people, and I spoke to a man on the phone, and he assured me that he was the only one there, so therefore he could not come by to pick up the dog. But he told me the location of animal control, which is on Bundy in Missouri, and he said that if I brought the dog by myself by 12 o'clock that they would take it, if not that they would be gone for the night. So
What happened next?
I told them I'd see what we could do, and I went downstairs and I told my wife about that the person was going home at midnight, but they weren't going to come by to pick the dog up on their own, so that we would have to bring the dog in ourselves. And we didn't like that very much because we wanted to help the dog find its way home, and wouldn't have known what the animal control people would do after they got the dog under the circumstances, and also because it was now approximately like 11:30. There was only half an hour to get the dog to the animal control people. So we discussed various options, one of which would be for me to, again, try to walk the dog back to where I found it, and my wife to come follow me in the car, so in case we couldn't find anyone, we still would have the option to put the dog into our car and take it to the shelter. But I didn't like that option very much because the dog was not, easily controlled, obviously, because it wouldn't necessarily walk where I wanted to take it. I didn't know if it would get in the car at all. And again, it was still dirty. I didn't necessarily want to bring it into my car like that. So we were discussing the various options, but we had pretty much decided not to take the dog to the animal control people at midnight. At that point, while we were discussing the various options, my neighbors came home. And
Can you tell us what their names were?
yes, his name is Sukru, and her name is Bettina. And they
What
live.
time was it when you saw them?
That would have been about 11:40.
At the time that they came into the apartment building, were you outside still?
Yes, we were out in the courtyard, and we were discussing whether it would be okay if maybe we could tie the dog up in the courtyard overnight, because my plan was to tie the dog up or to keep the dog with us overnight and then print up some posters on my computer, go back to the location, put up lost dog signs, and try to find the owner.
So you were outside in the courtyard with your wife and the dog?
And the dog,
When
absolutely.
Sukru and Bettina came up?
That's exactly what happened. And Sukru and Bettina take care of my dog when I'm away, either on vacation or if I'm out of town for the weekend. They take care of my animals. And so at that point, Sukru offered to take care of the dog overnight and to leave it out in the courtyard in the morning, so that in the morning I could deal with trying to find the owner once again.
And did you give him the dog?
At that point, I gave him the dog, and I said fine. And at that point, he took the leash that I had put on the dog was still on the dog. He took the dog for a walk. My wife and I spoke to his wife Bettina for a few more minutes, and then went to bed.
And did you see the dog again after that?
I have not seen the dog again since then. That was the last that I saw of the dog.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Mr. Uelmen?
Now, Mr. Schwab, when you first encountered the Akita,
Yes.
was it standing in one place, barking at one house?
It was standing. First it noticed myself and my dog, and as dogs do, they sniffed one another, and my dog growled at it. And then the dog turned and looked up that path leading to the corner house and started barking at the house.
Okay. Was the dog ever running from house to house?
I didn't know. The dog, while I was with the dog, didn't run, but walked, again, trying very hard to stay very close to myself and my dog, but stopping at each individual house and barking. There was also, when the two dogs first met, there was a little bit of barking between them, because my dog is aggressive that way and initially growled at the dog.
I see. So the dog was simply standing in one place, barking when you first encountered
It was not barking when I first encountered it. It was simply standing at the corner. And I approached it with my dog. The dogs smelled each other, growled, and barked a little bit between them. Then the dog, while I was still standing there, turned to look down this path and barked at the house.
I understand. And then the dog began to follow you?
Yeah, I waited at the corner for a few minutes to see if an owner would show up. Maybe the owner was a block or so behind the dog, but no one came. So I crossed the street from one side of Bundy to the other to see what the dog would do. Maybe the dog would turn around and go in the direction of its home, and I could then follow the dog back to where it came from. But the dog didn't do that. The dog followed myself and my dog across the street.
Okay. Now, is Bundy a busy street at that time of night?
Not especially busy, no. Not at that hour. During the day, it's somewhat busy, but at night, it's a quiet neighborhood at night.
Did you see any cars coming by?
I saw the police car that I mentioned that I flagged down. I did not recall seeing other cars. I'm not saying that there were no other cars that passed that night, but I don't, recall definitely, I saw a particular car.
Okay. Now, with respect to this police car, what direction was it going?
The police car, it was coming down Bundy. And it was on the other side of Bundy that I flagged it down. Therefore, it was coming from the direction of Montana. It was at that point I had crossed the street already, and it was on the other side of the street. So it was coming down Montana.
Excuse me.
Coming south?
Down from Montana.
I'm sorry. I'm going to have to interrupt for just a few minutes. Requests that I interrupt the proceedings to speak with him. And for the purpose of making this announcement, there was a court order that was made by the Superior Court, and I'm going to read it to you as follows. Minute order. The court has read and considered the ex parte application for emergency meeting between Supervising Judge Lance Ito and Defense Counsel and heard the argument of Robert Shapiro and Gerald Uelmen in camera. The court hereby appoints Judge Delbert Wong as a special master on behalf of the court. Judge Wong is directed to accompany counsel for the defendant to recover certain items of real evidence, to place any such real evidence under seal, and return any said items to this court forthwith. The clerk of the court is directed to take the items submitted by Judge Wong into the custody of the court, pending further order of this court. The case file shall be sealed pending further order of this court. It was the determination that the Superior Court, in essence, didn't really have the jurisdiction to handle this particular matter, since this case was not in the Superior Court, it's here in the Municipal Court. Nonetheless, Judge Delbert Wong was appointed as the special master, and as the special master, he did recover apparently some items of evidence related to this matter. They are in the envelope, or whatever it is in the envelope here that I'm holding in my hand. At this time, I'm going to deliver this to the clerk, and the clerk of the court will maintain the possession and control of this until the appropriate time in these proceedings when that envelope will be opened and we'll be able to determine what in fact is inside it. I do not know what is in the envelope. I do know, however, that Judge Wong does have a report, a written report of some kind, in addition to whatever physical evidence is in that envelope therein, and we will examine that in due course. At this point in time, I suggest that we continue with the examination of the witness.
This is the first I've learned of this because it was an ex parte application. Is the court aware of where the evidence originated from?
I do not know anything about it.
And does the court have any inclination to indicate at what point we'll be able to view that evidence?
I would think that that item of evidence could be opened as a part of the court record and the proceedings in this matter. I think that we should at least conclude the testimony of the witness that we have on the stand at this point before we would do that.
Thank you very much, Ellen.
Mr. Schwab, we were discussing the police car that you encountered on Bundy.
Yes.
Just so we have our bearings, Bundy runs north and south, doesn't it?
Yes, that's basically correct.
All right. And at this time, you were walking north on Bundy, going from Dorothy up to Montana?
That's correct.
Okay. And are you familiar now with where the scene of the homicide was at 875 South Bundy?
Yes.
All right, that's between Dorothy and Montana, isn't it correct?
That's between Dorothy and Gorham.
Dorothy and Gorham. And Gorham is between Dorothy and Montana.
That's correct.
So you would have walked right past it on the opposite side of the street?
I was on the opposite side of the street at that point. As I said, the dog crossed the street with myself and my dog, so at that point I was on the opposite side of the street.
All right. And do you recall approximately where you were when you first saw the police car?
That was before Gorham, so that was between Dorothy and Gorham that I first saw the police officer and called out to him.
Well, now thinking back to where you were, can you tell us where that was in relationship to the scene of these homicides?
Well, I don't know the exact scene of the homicide, not having really been there or seen anything connected with that. So I don't know the exact spot or anything like that. I know I was on the other side of the street. I was approaching Gorham. I wasn't at Gorham yet, and the police officer was on the other side of the street.
All right. And was the police officer moving, or was the car parked there, or what?
Well, the police officer was moving until I stopped him.
All right. You flagged him down?
Yes, I did.
Then he pulled a U-turn?
I spoke to him from that other side of Bundy. He was on the other side of the street, and I spoke to him. And since he was on the driver's side, I was able to communicate with him that way. I assumed that he made a U-turn because he ended up following me and the dog to Montana. But so I assume that that's what happened.
So the U-turn then would have been after you spoke to him. Initially, you spoke to him while he was just stopped in the middle of the street.
Initially, I spoke to him again. I don't know whether he made a U-turn, if he pulled into a driveway, or what.
But you spoke to him, and then he turned and proceeded in the
Yes,
opposite direction.
I continued. I actually crossed the street again. Bundy winds around, and I continued in a straight line back to Montana and Bundy.
Okay. And this was a normal black and white patrol car?
Yes,
LAPD?
yes,
Was the officer in uniform?
yes,
And was a male officer?
yes, it was.
And you don't remember his name, do you?
I never found out his name. He was a young black officer. I don't know his name.
All right. The officer at some point told you that he would contact animal control?
Yes, at that point he told me that he would contact animal control. So I assumed that he would then follow the dog and see where the dog led, and if necessary, take the dog. But as I said, the dog continued to follow us. It wouldn't leave my side at that point.
Did he take your name?
Not at that point. Initially, he didn't. After, again, I guess ended up being kind of a procession with myself and my dog, followed by the Akita, and then followed by the officer. And this led all the way back to Bundy in Montana. I turned right on Montana to head home, and with the dog still following me, he pulled into a driveway near my house, and we spoke again. And at that time, I gave him my address, my name, address, and phone number, and we agreed that I would continue to hold on to the dog, since that seemed to be what the dog wanted to do, and he would take care of contacting animal control.
Excellent. Did he observe the dog at that point?
I don't know.
Did you make any mention to him of the blood on the dog's legs or paws?
I just mentioned that the dog appeared to be lost. I did not make any mention of blood or anything like that at that time.
Now, you indicate you got home then about 11:05?
That's correct.
Had the dog, the Akita dog, stopped barking by that time?
Yeah, the dog seemed to have calmed down considerably by that time. Again, it followed me right up the stairs, right to my front door.
All right. And then you indicated at what time, about 11:30, 11:40, you turned the dog over to your neighbor, Sukru?
That's correct. Yeah, it was around 11:40.
11:40?
All right. Yeah, around 11. That's approximately the time, as best as I can recall.
Now, you indicated Mr. Sukru at that point.
Shukru's his first name.
What is his last name?
I don't know his last name.
Okay, we'll refer to him as Sukru then. Did he leave immediately to take the dog for a walk?
Not immediately, because we discussed what to do. He was concerned about going to work the next day and what to do about the dog. And so we discussed the various options, because we still could have tried to take the dog back to animal control at that point. But he's a very responsible person, and I knew the dog would be in good hands, so we discussed what to do. And what we decided at that point with it was that he would hold on to the dog for the night. If I got up early enough in the morning, I would get the dog from him before he left for work. If he didn't, he would tie the dog up in our courtyard outside that morning, and then therefore that morning I could walk the dog back again and put up posters trying to find the dog's owner. That's what we had agreed at that point. So there was some discussion at that point before I gave him the dog.
Did he take the dog then back to his apartment?
No, he took the dog for a walk at that point. He left with the dog through our apartment's back entrance. And that was the last I saw of the dog. When he left with the dog through the back entrance, my wife and I continued to talk to his wife, Bettina, for a bit, and then went upstairs to go to bed.
All right. So at no time then did he take the dog back to his apartment?
I didn't see him go into the apartment at that point. I saw him, again, the last I saw was when he walked off with the dog. And I went to bed.
To take the dog for a walk?
Yeah.
And did his wife go with him?
No. At first, he went off by himself, and we spoke to the wife.
Now, were you interviewed by the officers of the Los Angeles Police Department about these events shortly after?
Well, that morning, at 5 a.m., there was a pounding on my door, and my dog started barking, and I got up still in my underwear and went to the door, and there were two detectives outside, and I inquired what they wanted, and they said that they wanted to talk to me about the dog in connection with a homicide. So I asked them to wait outside, and I got dressed and woke up my wife and explained to her what was going on.
All right. And have you seen a statement that they obtained from you
No, I
at
have
that
not.
time? Could I show that to you?
Absolutely.
May I approach?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Schwab, the
Seen that.
statement indicates that you told the officers you first encountered the Akita dog at 11:15 p.m. Is that correct?
Is which correct?
Is that what the statement
The
says?
statement says that, yes.
All right. Is that what you told the officers?
I was trying to remember at that point, and at one point I did mention 11:15. Again, it was 5 a.m. in the morning, and I was very confused at that point as to what time all of this occurred. Unlike here and now, the officer didn't say, well, what time did you leave the house? What time did you get here? What time did you get there? I was trying to remember, and I couldn't remember whether the whole thing had started at 10:30 or 11 o'clock or any of that, and I was trying to remember. I said a couple of things. This is obviously the one he wrote down.
All right. So at that time, you did tell them it was 11:15 p.m. when you first encountered them?
That was one of the times that I mentioned in talking to them at that point, yeah.
All right. And as you've reconstructed it, you've been able to identify that time with
Yes, and
greater precision?
I was aware prior to this that is incorrect. I even called the police department back to explain to them that having remembered what had happened, at not being 5 a.m. anymore, and being able to remember what I did that night, I called the police to inform them that I knew that this time is incorrect, and that recalled better what time it was because I knew better what time I had left the house and what time this whole incident started.
And the statement also indicates that when you encountered the dog, it was obviously lost, running from house to house, barking. Is that correct?
First of all, it doesn't say anything about barking here. It incorrectly says that it's Dundee and Dorothy, not Bundy. And despite the fact that it says it was running from house to house, that's not the way it happened.
And that's not what you told them.
I tried to explain, as I've explained here, about the dog going from house to house, barking at the doors. I don't recall ever saying that the dog was running, because the dog was at no time while it was in my possession running. As I said previously, the dog was very dehydrated. It was not expending a lot of energy. It was not running around at all. It was doing a good amount of barking.
Thank you. I have nothing further. One more question. Did any officers come back to prepare a supplemental report after they spoke to you to correct any of these errors?
No one spoke to me after that in connection with this at all. I spoke to those two detectives, and the next that I knew about or relative to any of this was when I received my subpoena. A detective came to my apartment to issue me a subpoena. That was the next time that I spoke to anyone in person about any of this from the police department.
Thank you. Nothing further. True that.
Ms. Clark, do you have any questions on redirect?
Very briefly, Your Honor. The detectives that you spoke to, sir, do you see them here in court?
I don't, again, it was 5 a.m., so I don't recall who they were. I'm sorry.
Were you pretty tired at the time you spoke to them?
I was very tired when I spoke to them. It was quite abrupt, and it was scary to find out that that this was connected to a homicide in some way. So I was quite agitated. My wife was very upset. Bettina and Sukru were very upset. And it was 5 a.m. and it was still relatively dark out.
So do you think that that agitation and that confusion at being confronted with a traumatic event at 5 in the morning had something to do with the accuracy of the statements you may have given them at the time?
Absolutely. I was very confused at the time, and I know that the things, especially relative to time, that I said to the officers was completely inaccurate. I was trying very hard to remember at that time, and it was still coming to me. I was trying to fix in my head when the time was. It wasn't like I had a minute to think or to try to remember what I did or even what day of the week it was. Again, as I've told the court, I have a routine with my dog that differs from on the weekends than it does during the weekdays. And I was trying to remember at what time I left the house, and was at that point was even unsure whether I had left the house at 11:30 or 11 o'clock or 10:30. I wasn't sure at that point what time I had left the house.
Were you even sure of what day of the week it was when you were talking to them?
I was not clear at what time or what. Again, having woken up in the middle of the night, I wasn't sure whether it was a weekday or a weekend, especially being, in this case, it was Sunday leading into Monday. So it was a weekday, but the previous night was still the weekend.
And you didn't remember that at the time they spoke to you?
No.
Was this a real lengthy interview you had with them at 5 in the morning, or?
It was incredibly brief.
Incredibly brief?
Yeah, it was again, the biggest thing that I remember was that they said it was connected to a homicide, and at first I was going to have them come into the house, but then I saw that they were there with Bettina and Sukru, and my wife wasn't dressed yet, so then I said, okay, let's go downstairs to the court, the pool area of our building, and discuss it there.
And did they speak to you separately?
No.
Who was with you?
My wife was with me, Bettina and Sukru were there, and there were the two detectives.
And did they speak to you first, or to Bettina and Sukru first?
Well, Bettina and Sukru were already there. They were with the detectives. And
Well, at the time that you went down to speak to the detectives, were they speaking also, or was it just you?
there was some discussion. My wife was asking questions. I was asking questions because, we didn't know what was going on.
You were asking questions of the police,
Yes.
but when they were asking questions of you, were you the only one speaking?
No, I was not.
Who else was speaking?
Again, this is difficult for me because it was 5 o'clock in the morning. I just remember that my wife had asked the police officer some questions, and I had started to reconstruct what time it was. And at first I said I started with 11:30, and then my wife said no, you were home by then, and that was correct. And so then I was saying, well, maybe it was 11:15. I wasn't sure. I was still at that point trying to reconstruct what had happened, but then the police officer moved on to other questions or other matters.
Okay.
It was
So
very
how
brief.
long- I'm sorry, how long was the conversation you had with the police officers?
I would say between 5 and 10 minutes, tops.
I have nothing further.
Mr. Uelmen?
Nothing further.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
I'm going to remind you, please do not discuss your testimony with anyone but the lawyers in this matter until
Absolutely.
you've been completely excused, but you are free to step down. at this
Thank you.
time. I did want to make one statement to the lawyers with regard to the request for sidebar conferences. And traditionally, a sidebar conference is of the nature that we discuss things like what time a witness is going to be available. Is there some particular need on the part of the lawyers to vary from the court hours or something of that nature? I did grant a sidebar conference this morning at the request of the prosecution, probably for the kind of a matter that was not of the type that this court traditionally holds the sidebar kind of conferences for. For that reason, I did request that the court reporter prepare the transcript of that sidebar conference. Rose, do you know if that's completed?
They're working on it right now, it'll be ready by noon.
All right. So the transcript of that proceeding will be available to the attorneys and other interested parties as soon as it's finished, and it should be about noon. And I would ask the lawyers that unless we're dealing with matters concerning scheduling or things of that nature, that will not be done at the sidebar. Now, would this be an appropriate time? I think it would to open the envelope that was delivered to the court.
Yeah, I have
Your Honor,
civilian witnesses.
We will object to any opening of that envelope in the court. We do not believe that we...
Your Honor, you don't probably need to have conferences at this point concerning that matter. I have civilian witnesses present who are ready to testify. And if we could, I'd appreciate it if we could take their testimony rather than hold them here.
Well, that's fine. With regard to this particular envelope, then, is there going to be some written authorities delivered or some kind of a request done, either to open it or not open it?
Yes, Your Honor, there'll be a request not to open it that is sealed under the direction of the presiding judge of the Superior Court under the direction of Judge Delbert Wong. And it is evidence that is in possession of the defense, and we have no obligation to disclose and will not disclose until we feel that the appropriate time.
All right, well, it was the presiding judge of the Superior Court that directed this court to open that envelope, in fact, on the record. However, the Superior Court really doesn't appear that they actually had jurisdiction over this matter, which is why it was given to us in the first place. However, I will not do anything with that envelope in terms of opening it until such time as appropriate briefs or other information is made available to the court.
Your Honor, for the record, Judge Mills was not a party to any of these proceedings.
No, I know, it was Judge
And
Ito.
And to the best of my knowledge, since all these matters were under seal, were sealed immediately, Judge Mills has not had any direct knowledge as to what took place.
I don't know what he knows or what he doesn't know, but I will consider any authorities that you want to offer to the court with regard to what happens to that. I won't do anything but have the clerk maintain it at this
That's
point.
all we want.
All right.
Your Honor, how are we going to file points and authorities concerning the opening of that envelope when this was obviously evidence submitted by the defense of which we have no knowledge? Judge Ito is apparently the only judge that knows anything about it other than the defense. So basically, the court is saying to the defense to write a brief concerning its objection to the opening of an envelope to which we cannot respond because we do not have any information as to how that envelope came to the possession of the Superior Court, who put the evidence into that envelope, what kind of evidence it is, when it was recovered, how, from where.
Well,
How can we possibly...
all I'm prepared to tell you is that Judge Delbert Wong, who is a retired judge of the Superior Court, acted as a special master in connection with that and recovered whatever that item is. Where and when or what it is, I do not know.
Jeremy, that should be item or items.
Item or items, correct. I don't know.
I think
And-
that perhaps we-
And beyond that, and I think this is a novel situation for, I know it's a novel situation for me and perhaps for you as well. Judge Mills made some comment that suggested that since there is a right of reciprocal discovery and that there's been requests for discovery from both sides, that it would perhaps be appropriate that that item be opened in open court. Now, as I say, I'm willing to hold off at this particular point in time.
I think that's the best course of action.
But I'm not saying that that is going to remain indefinite in terms of the opening of that envelope. Okay. Call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. People call Sukru Boztepe.
Raise your right hand, please.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the cause now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth so help you God? Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
Sukru Boztepe, Sukru Boztepe.
You may inquire.
Thank you. May I have a moment, Your Honor? Mr. Boztepe, as of June the 12th, 1994, can you tell us in general where you were living? You don't have to give the exact address.
On Montana Avenue between Bundy and Selwyn Center.
And how far from the intersection of Bundy and Dorothy was that?
500 or 600 feet.
And is that a home or is that an apartment building?
Where I live,
Yes.
it's an apartment building.
Were you living there as of June the 12th, 1994?
Yes.
On that night, that was a Sunday night, had you gone out at some point?
Yes.
When did you come home?
I came home 11:40.
And when you got back, did you notice anything unusual?
Yeah, our upstairs neighbor Steven was sitting in the our patio area with his wife and a big white dog.
Were you alone that night when you came home?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Do you have a wife?
Yes.
Where was she when you came home?
She was in our house.
So when you got home at about 11:40, you were alone at that time.
Yes.
Where was it that you saw your neighbor with the big white dog?
Just in front of our window, almost. We have a swimming pool, and everybody is looking at the swimming pool, so they were sitting on the chair in front of our window.
So that was the pool area.
Yeah.
Had you ever seen that dog before?
No.
What was the name of your neighbor who you saw with that dog at about 11:40?
Steven.
Steve?
Steven.
Do you know his last name?
Schwab, I guess. I don't know how to pronounce it.
And who was Stephen with anybody besides the dog?
With his wife, Linda.
Linda?
Uh-huh.
Is that yes?
Yes.
When you saw him with that dog, that big white dog you'd never seen before, what did you do?
I asked, whose dog is this? And they answered.
And based on what they told you, what did you do?
Can you repeat it, please?
Yeah. You asked them whose dog it was.
Yeah.
And they gave you an answer.
Yeah, they said that...
You don't have to tell me what they said.
Okay.
You can just tell me what you did after they told you that.
I came into my apartment and woke my wife up to show off the dog. And we started to talk about what should we do about the dog. Should we go to animal shelter or should we keep?
What did you decide to do?
We decided to keep the dog overnight and then call the animal shelter tomorrow morning and give it to the animal shelter.
So did you take the dog into your apartment?
Yes.
Excuse me, one moment, please. What happened when you took the dog back to your apartment?
Dog was so nervous running around in the house, going to the window, going to the door, and we didn't feel comfortable with such a big dog in our apartment overnight, and we decided to take the dog for a walk.
How was the dog behaving when it was inside your apartment?
Very nervous.
Can you describe what you mean by that?
Yeah, as I told, I mean, running in the house, going to back and forth, and we don't have a big house. So dog was going to the window, scratching the door, smelling under the door, and trying to go out, I guess.
Well, did you notice anything unusual about the way the dog looked?
Can you tell me again?
Anything about its body? Anything on it that you saw?
There was red spots on the dog, on dog's feet, all of them.
All four of them?
Yeah,
What about on the legs?
legs too.
And what did that red spots look like? Those red spots look like to you?
Blood.
So the dog was acting nervous, and so what did you want to do?
We wanted to take the dog for a walk, so maybe we thought that we can find the owner.
How did you plan to walk the dog so that you could find the owner?
Steven said that he found the dog around Bundy and Dorothy, and we decided to take for a walk to that direction. And actually, we just let the dog lead us.
So you let the dog lead you?
Mm-hmm.
Was that yes?
Yes, sorry.
And was the dog on a leash?
Yes.
What time was it when you left your apartment with the dog?
Very much around 12 o'clock.
You mean midnight?
Yeah.
Did you go alone or did you bring your wife?
With my wife.
When you got out of the apartment building area, did you let the dog go in front of you?
Yes.
And where did the dog lead you?
South to Bundy.
And then where?
And then dog passed across the street to Bundy, crossed the street to the other side, and then start to pull me a lot harder than it was before. And then we walked for a while, and then he stopped, turned right, and just stopped. I turned right too.
So as you proceeded southbound on Bundy, the dog seemed to pull harder and harder,
Yes,
and then it stopped at some point on the sidewalk?
yes.
The point at on the sidewalk where it stopped, was there a path of any kind
Yes, it was a path to a house.
to the house?
Yes.
Is that yes?
Yes.
That point where the dog stopped and looked to the right up that path leading to the house, how far was that from your house, your apartment?
600 feet.
So when the dog stopped at that point on the sidewalk and looked to his right up the path, what did you do?
Dog was just in front of me, and I had to stop too. I turned right,